guys, Yoongi here, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I would like to start a discussion on a recent topic and hear your guys' thoughts on it after I give you both the for and against arguments. The question in concern we will be looking at is the following. Should BTS's Jungkook have performed at the FIFA World Cup 2022 opening ceremony in Qatar? I completely understand as an outsider not too familiar with this situation, thinking, well sure, why not? But there has been quite the debate going around recently regarding whether or not the World Cup should be held in Qatar at all, even though this decision was made back in December 2010, almost 12 whole years ago now. This is due to a multitude of reasons, some as small as the climate being unsuitable to play football in, to much more pressing issues such as the human rights violations in Qatar, which we'll be looking at a lot more in detail later on for those who aren't familiar. This controversy has now spread to Jungkook and his participation in the World Cup opening ceremony. When it was announced that BTS's Jungkook would be releasing a song titled Dreamers as the official World Cup soundtrack for 2022, I'm sure a lot of us were extremely excited. This would be a fabulous opportunity for him to get his name out there as a soloist. But BIGHIT later confirmed that Jungkook would also be performing this song at the World Cup opening ceremony in Qatar, which is where the controversy began. Before we go any further, we do need to quickly just run over some disclaimers. This video is going to be laid out in a debate style format where I'll be giving you all the for arguments and then the against arguments before sharing my own opinion and asking you for yours. Please do not think I'm necessarily agreeing with all these points just because I'm mentioning them. This video is in no way intending to send any hate to BTS, Jungkook, armies, etc. It's just I feel this is a very important topic we need to address, and I understand how that may come across as hateful or judgmental, but it's not. And lastly, I would love to hear your thoughts on this in the comments. I want us to have this discussion, but the only way we can do this is by remaining respectful towards one another. And if I see anyone just being outright rude unnecessarily, I will be removing them for the sake of keeping this conversation moving forward in a mature direction. Okay, so first of all, let's look at all the arguments for those who believe there is no issue with Jungkook's performance in Qatar. First up, Jungkook gets to greet Qatari armies. From what I could see, BTS has never actually been to Qatar or had chance to share their talents with Qatari armies. So their fan base over there have been waiting an extremely long time for even a small glimpse of BTS. They've greeted Jungkook at the airport since his arrival, and from clips circling on social media, we can see Jungkook seems to be having a great time shopping and interacting with fans wherever they spot him. One could argue that this was one of the big persuading factors for him when he agreed to do this, because he would finally get to visit fans who have been waiting a very long time to see him and the group. I believe at this moment in time we haven't exactly heard a statement from Jungkook himself confirming if this is his feelings on the matter, so this is all just speculation at this point. Another argument for this performance going ahead is that this is an incredible opportunity for him. I briefly touched upon this earlier, but just to elaborate, we cannot ignore how insane of an opportunity this must be for Jungkook to be performing on such a big global stage which will be witnessed around the world. Regardless of all the controversy, millions if not billions of people are expected to watch the World Cup this year, and many of them will probably start with the opening ceremony, curious to see what kind of show Qatar will put on. After all, they have either built or redesigned stadiums especially for this World Cup. So for an artist like Jungkook, who is just properly beginning his solo activities after being a member of a group for so many years, it is a very big deal to be able to get his name out there for such a massive audience. This would be him getting his start as a soloist on one of the biggest world stages available, and perhaps to a different and wider audience than he'd have received making a solo performance elsewhere. Moving on to another reason people are in support of Jungkook's performance is because he may not have had a choice in the matter. Over the last 40 or so years, both Qatar and South Korea have been working on building a stronger relationship with one another. And I think we can all agree that HYBE are basically working on a monopoly bigger than any of us can imagine, and would have seen a golden opportunity in involving themselves and their artists in the World Cup. Although BTS and Jungkook himself are these huge global names now, we also have to acknowledge that they are still technically under contract with BIGHIT Music and also HYBE. So with this in mind, we can also consider the fact that it is highly likely Jungkook did not have much say over whether or not he was involved in the World Cup soundtrack and consequently his performance in Qatar. Although BTS are in a very privileged position now, at the end of the day, if the higher-ups at HYBE wanted them involved in this World Cup and demanded that Jungkook be the one to represent them, then he probably had no choice in the matter. If he disapproves, he can't exactly express his outrage because for him this is work and this is his job. And lastly, for the argument for the performance, I know a lot of people will be waiting for this one. Human rights violations are not unique to Qatar alone. I've seen a lot of this point as the main argument in support of Jungkook. A lot of people believe that we cannot ignore the wrongs of other nations in the West when discussing whether the World Cup should be held in Qatar at all, or if Jungkook should be performing at their opening ceremony. A lot of fans in support of Jungkook's performance have been reminding others that there are many countries around the world who have committed similar atrocities, but people do not seem to be paying as much attention towards those. One example of many that I have seen amongst discussions is the ongoing hijab and burqa controversies consistently in Europe. For those unaware, the hijab and burqa are types of covering some Muslim women choose to wear. And as of July 2021, there is either a full or partial ban on women wearing the burqa in 15 European countries, with a full ban on wearing the burqa at all being enforced in 6 of these countries in public places: France, Belgium, Bulgaria, Austria, Denmark, and Switzerland. Each country has their own rules surrounding the breaking of this law, but it is usually punishable by fine. These laws are something which are often seen as a clear sign of Islamophobia, and even more specifically hijabophobia, which is discrimination against Muslim women who wear coverings such as the hijab. This is just one of many examples people are bringing to light to drive home the fact that people do not seem to be considering clear violations in human rights such as these when critiquing only Qatar. So why isn't the same energy and disapproval being pointed towards these countries also? We're now going to be moving on to the complete opposite side of the argument, those who disagree with Jungkook's performance in Qatar. The first point we'll be looking at is the human rights violations themselves are too terrible to overlook. I know we've gotten quite a way through the video before I've even mentioned said human rights violations in question, but that is because we're going to be discussing them a bit more in depth here, and why people are so outraged by either the World Cup being held here, or more so for our discussion, Jungkook performing here. One of many human rights violations looming over the Qatar World Cup was the treatment of the workers hired to build the infrastructure needed to host the event. Human Rights Watch and the International Trade Union Confederation have spoken out to say that migrant workers who were used to build the stadiums for the World Cup were left vulnerable to systematic abuse. In 2013, Amnesty International reported serious exploitation, including workers having to sign false statements saying they'd received their wages just to regain their passports. Workers were not allowed to leave their jobs or even the country without permission, which of course a lot of the time was not granted. Workers from Nepal reported they were not able to go home to their families after the Nepali earthquake in 2015. Migrant workers who were forced to stay by denying them promised salaries and withholding necessary worker ID permits were essentially rendered illegal aliens in the country. When the BBC tried to report on these conditions of work in 2015, their reporters were actually arrested in Qatar and held for 2 days. Although Qatar spoke out and said they were aiming to improve working conditions and allow workers to leave the country when required, in February 2019, Amnesty International said Qatar were falling short on their promise, and that abuse was still occurring. An investigation from the Daily Mirror newspaper in 2019 discovered that some of the 28,000 workers building the stadiums were actually being paid 750 Qatari rials per month, which currently is the equivalent to about £173 a month. This was raised in 2021 after years of hardship to 1,000 rials, still only £230 a month. In February 2021, it was thought that the death toll of migrant workers who had lost their lives working on the stadiums was around 6,500. Although these figures did not include occupation or place of work, so we could not conclusively confirm if these were all associated with the World Cup construction programme or other reasons. And of course, Qatar did not make any efforts to investigate them further, which they were critiqued for. But when considering these figures, a lot of reports have said, well, these migrant workers were only in Qatar to work on these stadiums, so it's fair to assume where they have unfortunately lost their lives. Another human rights violation coming into discussion is life for LGBT individuals in Qatar. Life as a member of the LGBTQIA+ is extremely difficult and almost impossible while living in Qatar. Homosexuality is currently illegal in Qatar, with quote-unquote offenders facing fines and up to 7 years in prison if caught, for instance, in the street holding hands, etc. In September of this year, Football Association Chief Executive Mark Bullingham assured fans that LGBT+ couples would not face arrest while holding hands or kissing in public in Qatar during the games. While this sounds promising, I guess, a few months after this in early November, a letter was actually sent out to all participating nations of the World Cup, telling them to cease current discussions and avoid any further ones surrounding Qatar's poor human rights record, to respect all opinions and beliefs without handing out moral lessons to the rest of the world, and to focus on football, not allowing football to be dragged into every ideological or political battle that exists. It's interesting to note also, by the way, that members of the UEFA working group, such as Australia, England, France, Germany and the US, to name a few, were specifically targeted for their involvement in trying to improve the conditions for migrant workers, women and the LGBT in Qatar. All of the nations who received the letter criticised it, but the letter itself proves the clear human rights issues are not something Qatar are willing to address or have others address, no matter how large they are. Therefore, with all this considered and so much more, a lot of people are critiquing this World Cup on a very large scale for having involvement with Qatar at all. And now, of course, this includes Jungkook, who performs at the opening ceremony. For many people, Jungkook's performance in Qatar is a symbol that he's on the same page as them in terms of willingness to turn a blind eye towards all the controversies surrounding the event and their human rights issues, that he is willing to ignore them as they have requested. Before I go on a rant about human rights for the rest of time, let's move on to the next point against Jungkook's performance. The idea that this isolates fans affected by said human rights issues. This one kind of ties into the point we've just discussed, but there will be a lot of armies or even casual BTS fans who were affected by the human rights issues in Qatar, and subsequently Jungkook's inclusion in their events. I'm not going to make this all about me, but it's just the easiest example I can use because it's close to home. Take myself, for example. I'm on the other side of the world, but I come from a migrant family. I'm a woman. I'm a member of the LGBT. There alone, I'm a member of at least 3 different groups who face discrimination in a place such as Qatar and would feel unwelcome or unsafe there. For people in similar situations as me, I understand how they could feel hurt or confused by Jungkook's seeming support of an event organised by a country who would treat these groups so badly. For BTS fans who have suffered at the hands of Qatar and their laws directly, perhaps those who literally live in Qatar, or are parts of these marginalised groups elsewhere who would feel the effects of these laws, this is probably going to hurt a lot. Seeing somebody you idolise as a symbol of a joy and escapism being actively involved with a country so problematic, who sees groups you are a part of as lesser individuals, it will come as kind of a shock, for the reasons we're about to address next also. This is against everything BTS stand for. BTS have been known for years as this group who always tried to campaign for a better tomorrow. I mean, they literally have a whole series based on the phrase "love yourself," which they eventually partnered with UNICEF to spread further. BTS has also spoken out many times on quite large platforms too, against discrimination. Most notably, BTS have made multiple visits and speeches at the United Nations, encouraging the next generation to be the voices of change. They spoke at the White House this year against Asian hate after the pandemic. These are just a few examples of BTS's multiple involvements with charities which aim to end hate and discrimination. Due to this, a lot of people are calling Jungkook's involvement with the World Cup in Qatar kind of hypocritical, because for years he has tried to spread this message of hope for a better tomorrow and the idea of loving yourself no matter what your background, and he is now willing to perform at a country on a completely different path who do not agree in the same brighter tomorrow for all. And last but not least, fans against Jungkook's performance are also saying they disagree because this is not the best way to go about a future career in the West. There has been signs for quite some time now that a few members of BTS would either appreciate or most likely go into a career breaking through into the Western media, kind of following on from how the group have already been breaking the West. So now fans are concerned that the huge controversies surrounding Jungkook's performance at this opening ceremony in Qatar could have actually tainted his chances of succeeding in the West. Other very large Western artists such as Dua Lipa have spoken out to say they would personally never perform at an event such as this in Qatar because they do not agree with anything the country stands for. Jungkook's performance there, however, has led to many news sources reporting on his involvement in contrast to statements such as Dua Lipa's, which inadvertently is painting him and his values in quite a negative light. Many media outlets are implying that this performance could be deemed disrespectful, and therefore some fans are now concerned that if Jungkook ever wants to gain the respect he deserves as a solo artist in the West, then performing at this opening ceremony was not the appropriate way to go about it. Okay, I know there will probably be so many more points we could discuss for both sides of this argument. A debate like this one could go on all day. So because I've gone on for long enough, I'm going to now share my own personal thoughts on this matter for those who are either curious or are ready to accuse me of sitting on the fence and playing devil's advocate. I'm going to be really honest. I actually debated whether or not I should make this video. People who have watched my videos before know I never usually shy away from a controversial topic, but this one somehow felt even bigger than me. But when I posted this poll on my YouTube community tab and I saw saw the response it received, that kind of convinced me that somebody needed to be brave and speak up about this topic. So that's what I'm here to do. It made me think, why am I scared to talk about this? And why haven't I seen other creators talking about it either? I think it's because they're probably afraid as well, which I understand. I think we're sometimes too afraid to speak out against groups perhaps as huge as BTS, through fear of backlash from such a humongous fandom. Am I still a little bit worried about all the hate comments I'm going to get from this video? Of course I am. I lost 2 subscribers within half an hour of me posting that part of my community tab, because some people are not willing to have this conversation. But I am. BTS are my alt group and have been for years, see my username for reference. But I've mentioned so many times that on this channel, the importance of critiquing your faves when it's necessary, or else you'll never see change. And I think now is one of those times. I'm one of those people who always try my very, very best to see both sides of an argument before passing my judgment. So in defense of those who agree with Jungkook's performance, I can see where he may not have had any choice in this matter thanks to hype. I did watch the performance to help me with this video, and although he did amazing as always in every performance, I can't say I personally saw much of Jungkook and his character in this performance, if that makes any sense. I have no idea if that was nerves or if his heart wasn't in it fully. I can't say that without any proof, it's unfair. But what I can say is I understand him taking this opportunity to advertise himself on such a huge global platform as a new soloist, and I understand he may not have had a choice either way. I completely understand the points some fans make when trying to drive home that there are atrocities in other countries besides Qatar not being given the same amount of critiquing. But for me, the existence of one problem does not immediately eradicate another. This is like the argument that goes around Twitter every time somebody says women suffer a lot at the hands of men. Somebody always has to say men also suffer at the hands of women. Of course they do, and nobody is implying otherwise, but that is not the problem at hand here, and I feel this situation is kind of similar as that. Whenever you try to discuss one big problem, somebody always has to come up with a counter one. There is a lot of Islamophobia that exists around the Western world that we absolutely should be giving as much critique towards as possible, but the existence of these issues in Europe do not excuse the treatments we are discussing right now in Qatar. 2 wrongs will never ever make a right. This whole situation to me is strange and something I never thought I'd be discussing, because this performance itself does not represent any member of BTS in the light I thought they wanted to be portrayed. This is not any member of the BTS I know and love, the BTS who spent years telling me to love myself no matter how many people are telling me not to. I want to believe that if BTS were just under Big Hit and not this huge sensation we now call hype, then this wouldn't have happened, but I simply don't know that. If you want a yes or no answer from me, I feel like everyone's going to get so mad at me for rambling, but I don't care. Would I have performed in Qatar's opening ceremony if I was in his position? No, I wouldn't have. To put it simply, the fact that being LGBT is still punishable by imprisonment or even worse in some places in 2022 is beyond my understanding. But I do not know exactly what his position in this ordeal is. None of us do. Which is why I think it's especially important for us to try and understand both sides of the coin here when deciding which way we flip it. Okay, now it's over to you guys. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on this in the comments. Do you think Jungkook should have performed at the World Cup opening ceremony in Qatar? I would love for people to be able to openly express their thoughts on this, but I do not want to see any attacking each other in the comments. That is not the way we're having this conversation, and I know we can have a mature discussion about this. Thank you so much for watching if you got this far. I hope you enjoyed this video, or at least found it helpful or interesting in some way. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, and if you're new here and haven't yet subscribed, please hit the subscribe button down below and turn on the notification bell. That'll let you be the first to hear whenever I upload. And as always, my social medias will be on screen. That is my Twitter and my Instagram. I always follow back fellow K-pop fans, so let's be friends. I'll see you next time. Bye guys!